A registered nurse in the United States earns about $77,000 per year before taxes. A registered nurse in Japan earns roughly $27,000 for the same work. Both hold similar credentials and work similar hours. The pay gap between them is $50,000 per year. That gap is not unique to nursing. Teachers, police officers, and other public workers face the same reality. Where you live determines your salary more than which profession you choose. This video runs the real numbers across 5 countries. By the end, one figure on this list will likely change how you think about the value placed on essential work. The 5 countries are the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Japan. These were selected because they represent different approaches to public sector wages, union structures, and government healthcare funding. The 3 professions covered are registered nurses, public school teachers, and police officers. All salary figures reflect median or average gross annual earnings before income tax. Amounts are converted to US dollars at current exchange rates, though local variation within each country remains wide. Sources are listed in the description. One distinction matters before the numbers begin. Nominal salary is not the same as purchasing power. $60,000 goes further in a rural area where housing costs are modest than in a high-cost city. This comparison uses national averages, and where variation within a country shapes the story, that variation is noted. Start with registered nursing, a profession under documented strain in every country on this list. The Bureau of Labor Statistics places the median annual wage for registered nurses in the United States at approximately $77,000. That national figure hides extreme internal variation. Canada and Australia occupy the middle of the range, though both remain below US levels in nominal terms. California nurses average close to $120,000 per year. The figure in South Dakota falls to about $58,000. The national median sits between those two extremes. Turn to the United Kingdom next. Registered nurses working within the National Health Service start at around £28,000 per year. With experience, that salary reaches roughly £35,000. At current exchange rates, the experienced figure sits near $44,000 US. National Health Service nurses receive defined pension contributions and strong employment protections, but the nominal wage is the lowest of the 5 countries in this comparison. The Canadian picture is more favorable. A registered nurse in Canada earns approximately $75,000 Canadian dollars per year. Converted to US dollars, that figure is around $55,000. Canadian nurses benefit from provincial healthcare coverage, and in many provinces, overtime protections limit the number of mandatory additional hours hospitals can require without extra compensation. Australia pays its nurses well relative to its economic profile. The national average for registered nurses sits near 75,000 Australian dollars. At current exchange rates, that converts to roughly 49,000 US dollars. Australian nursing unions have pushed base wages consistently above general inflation over the past decade, making this one of the stronger performing countries in this category. Japan stands apart from the other countries. A registered nurse in Japan earns approximately $27,000 US dollars per year. Japan faces a documented and growing nursing shortage. Despite strong social respect for the profession, wages have not risen to match the supply gap. The result is a salary that is roughly 1/3 of what a US nurse earns for comparable clinical work. The spread across these 5 countries is wide. A US nurse earns nearly 3 times what a Japanese nurse earns. A UK nurse earns less than 60% of the US figure. The teaching profession shows a different distribution than nursing. Union strength and levels of government education funding drive salary outcomes here more than market forces do. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports a median annual salary of approximately $66,000 for public elementary and secondary school teachers in the United States. That national average conceals the widest internal variation of any country in this comparison. New York and California public school teachers average above $80,000. South Carolina and Mississippi teachers average near $45,000. A teacher in a low-wage US state earns less than the average teacher in the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia. The United Kingdom has faced a persistent teacher recruitment problem, and government salaries have been revised upward in response. Newly qualified teachers start at approximately £30,000 per year. Experienced classroom teachers in standard roles reach around £45,000. At current exchange rates, that translates to roughly 57,000 US dollars. The starting salary has been a source of policy debate, particularly in London, where housing costs reduce real purchasing power sharply. Canada provides one of the more consistent salary floors in this comparison. A public school teacher earns around 65,000 Canadian dollars at entry level. With seniority, that figure reaches 80,000 Canadian dollars in several provinces. In US dollar terms, that range starts at around 48,000. The upper end reaches roughly $59,000. Ontario teachers are among the highest paid in the country, while rural provinces sit at the lower end of that range. Australia follows a similar trajectory. A beginning teacher earns around 55,000 Australian dollars. An experienced teacher reaches approximately 80,000 Australian dollars. At current exchange rates, that is about 52,000 US dollars. Pay scales are negotiated at the state level in Australia, producing internal variation that mirrors the situation in the US and Canada, though the range from state to state is somewhat narrower. The Japanese figure again falls below the others. A public school teacher in Japan earns approximately 39,000 US dollars per year. Japan holds education in high cultural regard, and teachers are addressed with formal respect across society. The salary does not match that cultural standing by international comparison, and Japan has reported difficulty attracting new graduates to the profession in recent years. Police officer compensation differs from nursing and teaching in one significant way. Base salary is routinely supplemented by overtime pay, shift differentials, and pension benefits that substantially increase total annual compensation beyond the nominal wage figure. At the base median level, Canada and Australia are broadly competitive with the United States for this profession. The Bureau of Labor Statistics places the median annual salary for police and sheriff officers in the United States at approximately $68,000. Total compensation in large urban departments, when overtime and supplemental pay are included, frequently reaches $100,000 or above. The pension systems in many major American police departments rank among the most generous in the entire public sector. The United Kingdom starts constables at approximately £29,000 per year. Officers with several years of experience reach around £40,000. At the experienced rank, that converts to roughly 51,000 US dollars. British police receive defined benefit pension contributions that represent significant value beyond the base wage, though the nominal starting salary remains low relative to living costs in major cities. Canada offers competitive compensation for police officers across most of the country. A constable working within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or a major municipal department typically starts near 75,000 Canadian dollars. Senior officers reach 90,000 Canadian dollars or above. In US dollar terms, entry-level pay sits near $55,000. Senior officers move towards $66,000 or higher. Australia presents a similar profile to Canada for this profession. A senior constable in a state police force earns roughly 85,000 Australian dollars. At current exchange rates, that is approximately 55,000 US dollars. Australian police work under collective agreements that include shift allowances, overtime provisions, and retirement contributions negotiated across state jurisdictions. Japan presents a different picture in this category. A police officer in Japan earns approximately 44,000 US dollars per year. That is above the Japanese figures for nursing and teaching, but still below all other countries in this comparison. The role carries the highest social prestige of the three professions covered in this video. Job security is strong, and the career structure is clearly defined. The wage, however, ranks last among the 5 countries. Among the 5 countries, American police officers show the highest total compensation ceiling, driven by overtime availability rather than base salary alone. Looking across all 5 countries and every profession reviewed, several patterns emerge consistently. The United States holds the top position in nominal salary for nursing and ranks first on average for teaching. For police officers, the US base salary is competitive, but total compensation through overtime and pension structures pushes the effective figure above other countries. The internal variation within the United States is the widest of any country on this list, however. A public worker in a low-wage American state can earn less than their counterpart in Canada, Australia, or the United Kingdom. Japan occupies the bottom position across all three professions, despite being the world's third largest economy by total output. The explanation is structural rather than reflecting a simple funding decision. Decades of deflation suppressed wage growth across the entire Japanese economy, not just in public sector roles. Unions in Japan hold considerably less collective bargaining power than their equivalents in Australia, Canada, or the United Kingdom. Those structural conditions have produced below-market wages for highly respected essential roles, and the gap has persisted for several decades. Australia and Canada both perform well across all three categories. Both countries maintain strong public sector unions, universal healthcare that reduces household medical expenses, and stable defined benefit pension systems. When total compensation is adjusted for these non-wage benefits, the effective gap between Australian or Canadian salaries and US salaries narrows considerably from what the nominal figures suggest. The United Kingdom falls in the middle on base wages. Non-wage benefits for British public workers, including National Health Service access, pension contributions and strong employment protections, add real value that does not appear in salary statistics alone. The UK government has raised public sector wages substantially over the past 2 years in response to prolonged industrial action by nurses, teachers, and other public workers who argued that prior salary levels were insufficient to maintain adequate workforce supply. Here is what the data shows across all 5 countries. Nurses earn the highest nominal salary in the United States, but a US nurse in Mississippi earns less than a Canadian or Australian nurse. The national average is accurate, but it conceals a range within the country that is as wide as the gap between countries. Teachers in the United States average above other countries, but the same internal variation applies. A teacher in South Carolina earns less than the average teacher in the UK, Canada, or Australia. Canada and Australia provide more consistent compensation across their national territories than the US does. Police officers in the US hold the highest ceiling, driven by overtime and supplemental pay structures, rather than base salary alone. Canada and Australia are competitive at the base salary level for this profession. Japan ranks last across all 3 professions, and the margin is not small. It is structural and it has persisted across multiple decades without significant correction. The practical point is straightforward. Where you work determines the financial outcome of these careers as much as which profession you choose. A US nurse earns nearly 3 times what a Japanese nurse earns. A Canadian teacher earns more than a US teacher in most American states. The profession does not fully control the salary. The country where you practice it matters just as much. If this comparison was useful, subscribe. New breakdowns publish every week. Drop a comment with the profession or country comparison you want to see next. Sources for all salary figures are listed in the description below.